where we are studying the book of Revelation. And tonight we are continuing in Lesson 9, which is chapter 12. And then we also have new notes for chapter 13, and they're on the table over here. And you will, I hope you will need those tonight. Some of you may not need them. You may already have them down. But we do want to begin with a word of prayer. And Randy, would you lead us in prayer as we start? Okay, Sam, quit bothering. Amen. Well, we were into chapter 9 last week, and we were talking about Rhema. You remember that? We were, and somebody looked at. Well, I thought I'd go ahead and give you some information as we start tonight. And so I looked up in Unger's Bible Dictionary, which is an excellent Bible dictionary, by the way. If you're looking for a Bible dictionary, Unger's is a great one. And here's what they have to say. They give it, of course, in Hebrew. And the word means height. So what is your Rhema?
Short.
And Rhema is a town in Benjamin, Joshua 18:25, 5 miles north of Jerusalem. The name means height, and many towns and cities in Palestine were located on the tops of hills for safety purposes, and those that were especially conspicuous came to be called the height, Rhema. Several places in Palestine were called by this name. The prophetess Deborah in Judges 4 and 5 used to sit beneath a palm tree somewhere between Ramah and Bethel, which lay in Ephraimite territory. Samuel was born and resided there and was buried in Ramah. So I thought I'd show you a map, and if that map has very small words on it, so let me just point a couple things out to you. This is Jerusalem right here. Here's Bethlehem. What happened in Bethlehem that gets a quote about Rhema? And what happened that led to that quote?
The slaughter of all boys under 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years old and under. Remember, at the birth of Christ. And so that was in Bethlehem. And then we get the quote about Ramah, which is 5 miles north of Jerusalem. So here's Jerusalem. By the way, if you want to find Jerusalem, you find the Dead Sea. And the top of the Dead Sea, if you go in a straight line, if you go 1/3 of the distance to the Mediterranean Sea, you'll be at Jerusalem. Or you can go to the Mediterranean Sea and come back 2/3 and you'll be there. Okay, so I wanted to just point that out because we were trying to figure out what was going on with Rhema. So I wanted to look that up. All right, we're back in chapter 12. We're at verses 5 and 6. So the woman, who is the woman in chapter 12? Israel. So the woman gave birth to a son, a male child, who is going to rule. I want you to notice there's a change. There is a change in the tense of the verb. She gave birth is past tense, right? He is going to rule is what? Future tense.
All nations.
What's that?
All nations.
Yeah, he's going to rule over all the nations with an iron what? Rod. Her child was suddenly caught up to God and to his throne. That's in 12:6. And she fled into the wilderness where a place had been prepared for her by God, and so she could be taken care of for, which is the same as 3.5 years, or 42 months. Yeah. All right, we're going to make some observations on that. The woman gave birth to a son, a male child, which is Christ. Satan was not able to kill the child when he was born, but you can be sure he had all the demons on call, and he himself was there trying desperately to kill this baby as soon as it was born. And even though that part of the story is not recorded in the gospel records, by the way, which Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which one of those would you go to? Which two would you go to find the story of the birth of Christ? Matthew and Luke. Which one of them tells about the Magi? Matthew. Okay. You guys are sharp. I'd say go to the front of the class, but we don't have room. Okay. Yeah. B, the child is destined to rule over all the nations with an iron rod. Obviously, this is a reference to him being the Messiah. It will recall to the minds of the Jews who are living during the tribulation the great messianic Psalm 2, where the Father is speaking to the Son. And just about every Jewish boy, and probably girl, would be familiar with Psalm 2 because it's a messianic psalm. And in verse 9 it says, "Ask me," it's God the Father speaking, "ask me and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession." That's worldwide rule, isn't it? Okay. "You will break them with a rod of iron. You will dash them to pieces like pottery." Okay, observation C. There is no mention in this dramatic portrayal of the life and death and resurrection of Christ. Only that he was caught up to God and to his throne. Do you wonder why? Didn't say anything about his death, burial, and resurrection in this little portrayal that's done in the sky. Well, the fact that he was caught up to God, I think this also is intended to bring to mind to those on earth during the tribulation the words of Jesus before the high priest at his trial. In Matthew 26, we read, Jesus remained silent when charges were leveled at him. He just sat there or stood there and remained silent. Then the high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." I want you to look at verse 26. Very interesting. You, Jesus says, you have said it yourself. And I'll bet right there was a stab. When Jesus says to the high priest that he had said it himself, I think Jesus is revealing a secret Caiaphas did not want to get out. He had already admitted to himself and perhaps to others that Jesus had to be the Christ, the Son of God. You have said it yourself. But I say to all of you, from now on, even from your vantage point in hell, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. So, when the Jews during the tribulation see this dramatically acted out, some of them will have studied the Gospels and remember what Jesus had said. 1260 days. So God will take care of Israel during the second half of the tribulation when Satan is attempting to annihilate Israel. Why? So that there could be no fulfillment of the kingdom era in the millennium. If Satan could just wipe out Israel, he would do that. All right. Now, in Matthew chapter 24, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath. For then there will be a great tribulation, such as not been seen from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being could be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Now that's Jesus talking about what happens starting at the mid-tribulation point. At the middle of the tribulation, Jesus is saying, watch out for the abomination that causes desolation. Because when that occurs, Israel better flee to the mountains. And otherwise, if God didn't do some intervening, there would be no chance for anybody to be saved, to survive. Okay. And observation 3. Michael, the archangel, cast Satan out of heaven. Revelation 12. Then war broke out in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But the dragon was not strong enough to prevail, and so there was no longer any place left in heaven for him and his angels. So that huge dragon, the ancient serpent, the one called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world, was thrown down to the earth and his angels along with him. And we get that imagery. And remember, it's like The big screen TV in heaven is being watched, and this is being played out. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "The salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the ruling authority of His Christ have now come, because the accuser of our brothers and sisters, the one who accuses them day and night before our God, has been thrown down. But they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they did not love their lives so much that they were afraid to die. Therefore, you heavens, rejoice, and all who reside in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you. He is filled with" what? Terrible anger. For he knows he has only a little time. All right, this is a very important little section in here. We're going to make some observations. As the inhabitants of earth continue to watch this heavenly drama unfold, it now takes a different turn. They watch as war breaks out in heaven between Satan and his demons and Michael the archangel and his angels. The battle wages as the earthlings watch, and Michael wins the war. The result is that there's no place in heaven for Satan and his demons, and they are cast out of heaven to the earth. Then there's this great announcement, a loud voice in heaven that says, "The salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the ruling authority of His Christ have now come." That statement anticipates the beginning of the millennial reign of Christ, but also the end of Satan and his demonic activity in heaven. From this point on, Satan concentrates his efforts on the destruction on earth. Letter C. Because the accuser of our brothers and sisters, the one who accuses them day and night before our God, has been thrown down. A note is then made about those accused. But they overcame him, Satan, by the blood of the Lamb and by what else? The word of their testimony. So those are two things that bring about the victory of a Christian. The power of the blood of Jesus Christ and reciting your own testimony of what God has already done for you. All of us need to have better memories. If you look back in your life, you will be able to remember things that God has done for you, and He intervened for you, and He stepped into your life, and it was unmistakably Him. And what happened was unmistakably God stepping into your life. Everybody has testimonies of that. And we all need to remember those times. This is what God has done for me. And that's the reason I can face what I'm facing today. And I will overcome Satan because God has always given me the victory in the past. He's always helped me to meet the circumstances. And this is no exception. He will help me and aid me right now at my time of need. And so the word of my testimony reminds me of what God has already done for me. And then I depend upon the power of God, not my strength, but the blood of the Lamb. And they won over Satan by those things. And it says they did not love their lives so much that they were afraid to die. In other words, I think the more that you walk with the Lord, the less important it is that you survive. It's just kind of like Enoch. And when you walk with God, you don't mind him saying, let's go to my place, it's closer. They didn't love their lives so much that they were afraid to die. Observation E. Heaven can now rejoice at the expulsion of evil from heaven, but earth and even the sea better watch out. Satan will express his full anger on earth, since it is now clear to him that he has lost the battle and his time is short.
So he does know.
He does know. At that point, I think that today he's still confident he's going to win. I think he believes his own lies. Look at 12:13. Now when the dragon realized that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued what? Who was the woman? Israel, who had given birth to the male child. So he's concentrating his efforts on God's chosen people. But the woman was given the two wings of a giant eagle so that she could fly out into the wilderness to the place God prepared for her, where she is taken care of, away from the presence of the serpent. For how long? For a time, times, and half a time, which is what?
3.5 years.
Okay, 3.5 years. Now, we've had 1,260 days, 42 months, 3.5 years, and time, times, and half a time. So we got 4 ways that we've been referring to 3.5 years. And this would be the last half of the tribulation, because at the midpoint of the tribulation is when the Antichrist is seen as the enemy of Israel. Okay? All right. Then the serpent did what? Spouted water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, after Israel, in an attempt to do what? By a flood. So he's trying everything he can to destroy Israel. But the earth came to her rescue. I think that's interesting. The earth came to her rescue. The ground opened up and swallowed the river that the dragon had spewed from his mouth. Isn't that something? So, what was the dragon, Satan's, response to that?
Enraged.
The dragon became enraged at the woman and went away to make war on the rest of her children. Now notice who those children are.
Those who keep God's commandments.
Those who keep God's commandments and, all right, so these are Jewish Christians during the tribulation. So a lot of Jews will have trusted Christ, and Satan now turns his attention. I mean, you remember we had the 144,000 that were sealed as a special witnesses for the Lord. But you will remember now that we have, in the second half of the tribulation, we have this going on, and there are a lot of Jews that have trusted Christ as their Savior, and now the dragon, Satan, turns his full attention. I'm going to kill every Christian Jew I can find. I'm going to kill every Christian Jew.
So would you say that, because we have two sets of Jews involved here, the unbelieving Jews are the ones that are being protected, and the believing Jews are the ones that are going to experience even more of the
I'm not sure if they're being protected as much. Well, they are being protected.
yeah.
Yes, they're being protected.
The ones who are believers in Jesus, God knows that, okay, they're going to be in heaven.
Yeah, they're going to, a lot of them are going to be martyred.
They're going to be martyred, but they'll be in heaven.
Yes.
For those that are not believers yet,
This is it.
they're not there yet, so.
Right,
still
right.
time.
Yeah, you're right. It's a good observation. Thank you. Appreciate that, guys. Look at verse 18. And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. We're going to say more about that, about verse 18 there. But first we're going to make some observations. Once thrown to earth, Satan is intent on the destruction of Israel. We are at the mid-tribulation point in our sky view of these things acted out. B, God provides the wings of a giant eagle to transport Israel out of the presence of Satan and into the wilderness, perhaps to Petra. Dr. J. Dwight Pentecost writes, Petra was the fortress capital of the Nabateans in Edom, over there by the south of the Dead Sea. This city has a narrow access which could easily be blocked, but which opens up into a large canyon capable of carrying for many thousands of people. So it's an ideal place. And he is suggesting that may be the place that God has prepared for those Jews that are fleeing. C, the length of time necessary for her protection is 3.5 years, which would be the last half of the tribulation. Okay. Letter D. Satan, in pursuit of Israel, attempts to sweep Israel away with a flood of waters which comes out of his mouth. This attempt to drown Israel may be a symbolic flood, such as a fire or real water. The reason some suggest it to be symbolic has to do with the terrain of Israel right there, which would require a great deal of water because of the mountains and valleys and so on that are going on there.
Brings to mind the parting of the Red Sea, though.
Yes. Yeah. So, anyway, whether it's symbolic water or real, God causes the ground to open up and swallow the water so that the woman is not completely destroyed. Now, I want to make a little note about Zechariah 13, verse 8. It will happen in all the land, says the Lord, that 2/3 of the people in it will be cut off and die. Now, I think that covers the entire tribulation. 1/3 will be left in it. Then I will bring the remaining third into the fire. I will refine them like silver is refined, and will test them like gold is tested. They will call on my name, and I will answer. I will say, these are my people, and they will say, the Lord is my God. And Zechariah speaking about that time of the tribulation. The 1/3 left would include the 144,000 believing Jews who were his witnesses in the second half of the tribulation. Okay, and the dragon stood on the seashore. Okay, we're going to look at now chapter 13, your new notes for tonight. And if you didn't get those, we have them on the table over here. Chapter 13 of Revelation talks about two beasts. There's the beast from the sea and the beast from the earth. And I need to do some introductory remarks before we actually get into the text. Because this chapter, chapter 13, discusses the one that we call the Antichrist, I thought a few words ought to be said about that powerful figure before we actually get into the text of chapter 13. So the word Antichrist is only used in the New Testament, and it's only used by John in his epistles. In fact, it only occurs 5 times. And the references are 1 John 2:18, where the word is used twice, and in chapter 2, verse 22, and in chapter 3, verse 4, and in 2 John, verse 7. Those are the 5 times that the word Antichrist occurs. Again, J. Dwight Pentecost in the book Things to Come, which, by the way, is a great resource for you to have. Page 338, he writes this: a study of these references, the ones I just gave you, will reveal that John is principally concerned with an immediate doctrinal error, and that was the denial of the person of Christ. The emphasis is not on a future revelation of an individual, but rather on the present manifestation of false doctrine. To John, Antichrist was already present. So then the question arises as to the relation between the Antichrist of John's epistles and the beast of Revelation chapter 1. Now, Antichrist, anti, the prefix anti, may be used either in the sense of instead of or against. Aldrich correctly observes the solution of the problem of the identification of Antichrist would seem to depend upon whether light can be thrown on the question of whether he is primarily the great enemy of Christ or whether he is a false Christ.
I think the answer is yes.
Yes. False Christs are the subject of our Lord in Matthew 24. And in Mark 13, Aldrich writes on this: the pseudo-Christos, false Christ, does not deny the being of a Christ. On the contrary, he builds on the world's expectation of such a person. Only he appropriates these to himself, blasphemously affirms that he is the foretold one in whom God's promises and men's expectations are fulfilled. So Jesus warned in Matthew chapter 24 that in the last days there would be many coming in his name claiming to be the Christ. They are pseudo false Christs. But as Revelation 13 unfolds, it seems that the first beast is not just a pseudo-Christ, but also he is in opposition to Christ. Thus, the person of the Antichrist of the end times seems to embody both a false Christ and one who is opposed to Christ? So the answer is yes. Revelation 13 introduces us to the dragon's, Satan's, new strategy in his goal to annihilate Israel. Remember, in chapter 12, he was cast out of heaven, lands on earth, has one goal in mind: I'm going to wipe out Israel, and I'm especially going to kill every Christian Jew I can find. But his efforts were thwarted. The earth swallowed up the river, and God gave a hiding place. So, chapter 13 introduces us to the dragon's new strategy in his goal to annihilate Israel. It will involve two beasts, one from the sea, representing the Gentile source of powerful monsters, and one from the earth, a less powerful, more diplomatic false prophet who will champion the goals of the first beast. His goal will be to cause everyone on earth to worship the first beast and receive his mark on their bodies. Now, before we get into the text, let me just say that there is a Greek text wording and a verse division dispute at the end of chapter 12 and the beginning of chapter 13. A textual problem. Okay. The text problem, the question is, are we talking about John or are we talking about the beast? Now, there is a Greek text which is referred to as the Textus Receptus. The Textus Receptus is very close to another one called the majority text. So if you study Greek, you'll understand that there's this family of texts, and there's this Greek text called the Textus Receptus, from which the King James is translated, and there's a majority text from which the New King James is translated. And here's how that reads, chapter 13, verse 1. Then I, John, stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast coming up from the sea. Chapter 13, verse 1. Now there's another Greek text, and that's called the UBS text. And it reads, chapter 12, verse 18. And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Who was standing on the seashore in the Textus Receptus? John. Who's standing on the seashore in the UBS text? The dragon. Then 13:1, then I saw a beast come up from the sea. Okay. Now, I would say that, in my opinion, it fits the context better that we go with it being the beast who is standing on the seashore, not John, but it is the beast standing on the seashore. So I go with that reading. All right, then there's a chapter division dispute. Should there be a chapter 12, verse 18, or no 12, verse 18? That's the question. So again, the UBS text, the Greek text, has a verse 18 at the end of chapter 12. And that reads, chapter 12, verse 18, and the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. And then chapter 13, verse 1, then I saw, John speaking, a beast coming out of the sea. Okay. But the Textus Receptus and the majority text do not have verse 18 at the end of chapter 12. They just have 17 verses. Instead, chapter 13 begins with, "Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast coming up from the sea." Okay, so you'll notice in this version, it's John who is standing, and you'll notice that they don't have a verse 18, but the contents of verse 18 is moved to chapter 13, verse 1. I prefer that arrangement, that it should be part of chapter 13 and not tacked at the end of 12. And I prefer the New American Standard translation on this, and it reads, "And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 crowns, and on his heads were blasphemous names." I think that's the best reading for the following 2 reasons. It has the dragon, rather than John, as the one who is standing on the sand of the sea. And I believe that fits better with the context, and it is the oldest reading. And normally the oldest reading is going to be the preferred reading, or probably the original reading.
And is John still in heaven at this point, looking down, or receiving?
No, John seems to have already been transported to the earth.
John has.
Yeah, in this dramatic portrayal. Secondly, it doesn't have a verse 18 in chapter 12, so chapter 13 begins with the dragon standing on the sea, waiting. And then the beast out of the sea appears. I believe that's the original reading and the proper way to begin chapter 13. Now, having said that, you will recall that chapter and verse divisions are not inspired. God didn't say, "And now for chapter 3. And this is verse," no, none of that. In fact, they were added by man fairly recently in the year 1551 AD, so you can find the place you're looking for easier. How many of you think that was a good idea? Okay. And but these man-made divisions are usually helpful. Sometimes they wrongly divide the flow of thought. So before 1551 AD, at baseball and football games, no one could hold up a sign saying John 3:16. Do you see it? Okay. Well, you couldn't, because, you couldn't do that before 1551. So those football games before that, you didn't. And nor did they do it at baseball games either, like the World Series. They just didn't do it. Because those divisions weren't there yet. Okay, we're going to identify some personages. The dragon is Satan, who in this chapter is a counterfeit father in an unholy trinity. The beast out of the sea is the Antichrist, who is both a counterfeit Christ and opposed to Christ. Beast out of the earth is the false prophet, who is a counterfeit spirit, a counterfeit Holy Spirit. Or I should say an unholy spirit. Okay, we're going to look at them. First of all is the beast out of the sea, chapter 13, verses 1 through 10. Verse 1, "And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems," crowns, "and on his heads were blasphemous names." We're going to make some observations on that. First is that the dragon is standing on the shore of the sea. It is as though he is there to call up and empower a man who will be a false son of God. In chapter 13, we have an unholy trinity. The dragon is like the Father, the beast like the Son, and the second beast is like the Spirit. Henry Barclay Sweet writes this: the sea is an apt symbol of the agitated surface of unregenerate humanity. And he quotes Isaiah 57, verse 20. But the wicked are like the tossing sea, which cannot rest, whose waves cast up mire and mud. And especially of the seething cauldron of national and social life, out of which the great historical movements of the world arise. And then he quotes, or he just gives the reference of Isaiah 17, which I wrote out. Woe to the many nations that rage. They rage like the raging sea. Woe to the peoples who roar. They roar like the roaring of great waters.
It's interesting because, you know, this observation is that in essence, you look at false religions that are out there, they arose out of times of turmoil. Christianity arose during the time of Pax Romana, which means that was a time of peace across Rome. So it wasn't out of a tumultuous time in terms of politics. It was a peaceful time.
Yes.
Contrast-
God had perfect timing in the sending of His.
The contrast between
Yes.
the false religions and Christianity.
And so at this particular time, the time of the tribulation, there's this raging sea. A second observation is that the dragon represents both Satan and the Gentile world powers during the tribulation. So this dragon is not only Satan, but he represents the Gentile world powers during the tribulation. This is seen in the fact that the dragon has 7 heads with crowns on their heads. We'll say more about that in a little bit. Letter C, the beast came up out of the sea. It seems best to understand the sea as being his physical Gentile origin, of Gentile origin, as a powerful monster who opposes Israel. Whereas Revelation 17:8 speaks of his spiritual connection with the abyss, the place of demons. And I'll read that in just a second. Also, it should be noted that the ancients viewed the sea as the source of huge, powerful, evil monsters to which none on earth could compare. And so in John's day, when he is writing this, and he talks about this beast that's coming out of the sea, he's talking about a monster. And the ancients of those days thought of the sea as being the source of the worst possible monsters. So he's writing in a culture and borrowing from that culture that concept.
Leviathan.
What?
Leviathan.
Yeah, like Leviathan. Yes. Revelation 17:8 says, the beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. So there he is saying that the beast also has a source in the abyss. G.K. Beale, in his commentary on Revelation, said that without exception, the imagery of the sea monster is used throughout the Old Testament to represent evil kingdoms who persecute God's people, without exception. So that terminology was understood by the Old Testament saint as that which represents evil political powers. D, the beast had 10 horns and 7 heads. and on its horns were 7 crowns. Thus the horns are men who are important Gentile rulers during the tribulation. Letter E. At once we notice the similarity of this beast with the description of the dragon that we've already looked at in chapter 12. But let's remind ourselves. In chapter 12, verse 3, it said, Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. Now the dragon is what? The dragon is Satan. But he is also closely linked with him are those political powers. Yeah. The difference is that the crowns are on the 7 heads of the dragon, whereas the crowns are on the 10 horns of the beast. Horns are always a sign of power. When we get to chapter 17, the beast is developed a lot more, but we're being introduced to it here. Letter F. On each of the heads of this first beast was a blasphemous name. Now, how many heads did he have? 7. On each of those was a blasphemous name. This is likely either a claim to deity or it indicates a trust in a false god which Satan promoted. Remember, Daniel had his false gods. The Medo-Persians had their false gods. Greek had all their mythology, and so on. All right, letter G. Whoops, come back here. This beast's horns represent the Gentile rulers of the revived Roman Empire, including the Antichrist, who will be seen as the Messiah of Israel and worshipped. Falsely seen, but seen as the Messiah. Now, I'd like us to compare chapter 13, verse 8 and 17, verse 8. In chapter Revelation 13, verse 8, and all those who live on the earth will worship the beast, everyone whose name has not been written since the foundation of the world in the book of life belonging to the Lamb who was killed. So in other words, there are names of people who will be saved, and they're in that Lamb's book of life, and they won't be worshiping the beast, but everybody else will. All right, chapter 17, verse 8. The beast you saw was and is not, but is about to come up from the abyss and then go to destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, all those whose names have not been written in the book of life since the foundation of the world, will be astounded when they see that the beast was and is not, but is to come. They'll be astonished at that, at his appearance. All right, letter H. The beast is to be identified with the 4th beast of Daniel 7. Now, on Sunday mornings, we're studying in Sunday school the book of Daniel, and we're not near to 7 yet, but we can look at this. Whose horns represent the revived Roman Empire of the tribulation time, with its first 10 rulers, and then 7, and the satanically empowered little horn, that's in Daniel 7, the Antichrist, who will emerge as the sole ruler of the world and will deceive the nations. That's Daniel 7. So I thought we ought to take a look at that and let's just read the text. Daniel said, In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the 4 winds of heaven, churning up the great sea. Well, that sounds familiar, doesn't it?
4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. And you remember, those 4 beasts are Gentile rulers. They come out of the sea. The first was like a lion. It had wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted up from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. That's the lion. That was Babylon. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And it was told, "Get up and eat your fill of flesh." So that's a lopsided bear. He's raised up on one side. Okay. And after that, I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. What country, what empire was that? That's Greece. That was Greece.
Alexander's campaigns were swift.
Yes, he was swift, and
Died, his kingdom was
when he died, his kingdom was divided among 4 generals. That's why it has 4 wings. Okay.
So which country was number 5 referring to?
Let's see. A second beast, that was Media Persia. I will make that point in the observations when we get there. If we get there. We better get there. Given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. Man, I thought that the bear raised up on its side sounded pretty frightening, but this one, Daniel says, was very, very frightening. And it had large iron teeth. Iron teeth. This will be Rome. And by the way, it is described in the image of Daniel chapter 2 as made of iron. Anyway, that's a side note. That's extra. You don't have to pay for that.
Next week they will.
Yeah. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts. And it had 10 horns. This is Rome. While I was thinking about the horns, has 10 horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. So you had 10 horns, 3 are uprooted. How many are left?
7.
Except you have another one now, a little horn, which makes 8 altogether. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being and a mouth that spoke boastfully. Verse 11. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven.
Well, that sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yes. He approached the Ancient of Days, which was the Father, and was led into his presence. And he was given authority and glory and sovereign power All nations and peoples of every language worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Who is it? Jesus. Verse 15, I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The four beasts, great beasts, are four kings that will rise from the earth. It was the sea. You remember that? They all came from the sea. He says they will rise from the earth. But the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. Boy, that was a short summary, wasn't it? Then I wanted to know the meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying, with its iron teeth and bronze claws, and the beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others, and that had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I watched, this horn was waging war against who?
The holy people.
And defeating them. The holy people would be Israel. And that happened until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High, and the time came when they possessed the kingdom. Israel will be restored. He gave me this explanation. The fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on the earth. That will appear on the earth. It would be Rome. It'll be different from all the other kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from what? Kingdom. And after them another king will arise, different from the earlier ones, and he will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his holy people, which would be Israel, and try to change the set times and the laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for times and half a time, which is 3.5 years. But the court will sit and his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty and the power and the greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers of the people will obey him. We're going to make a few observations. Whew, I know. A few observations here. Daniel's vision of the 4 beasts pictured 4 kingdoms during the time of the Gentiles. During the what? Times of the Gentiles. Okay. In Luke 21:24, Jesus refers to the time of the Gentiles. That's very important. This is that historic period of time when Israel is not a monarchy. What's a monarchy?
Ruled by a king.
Ruled by a king. Is Israel ruled by a king today? No. And successive Gentile kingdoms will dominate the world until Christ returns and establishes his worldwide kingdom. That's the time of the Gentiles. So the time of the Gentiles began with Nebuchadnezzar, his destruction of Jerusalem, that ended the monarchy of Judah. All right. Come back here. The 4 beasts came up out of the sea, just as the beast of Revelation 13. The sea was churning. The sea represents the world of evil Gentiles. The beasts were a lion, which represented Babylon, a lopsided bear, which represented Media Persia. Persia became the more dominant. So then you refer to the Persian Empire. a leopard, which represents Greece, and a most terrifying beast, which represents Rome. The fourth beast is the Roman Empire. Interestingly, J. Vernon McGee, in his commentary on Daniel, says this: the Roman Empire simply fell apart. It lives on in many nations of Europe. In those nations that border the Mediterranean and in North Africa, all those which were a part of the Roman Empire, no one overcame Rome. It fell apart into these different nations. Now, that's very important. This Roman Empire is still around. It's just existing not as an organized thing, but it's still there. 5. The horns on the beasts are rulers of the revived Roman Empire at the time of the tribulation. That's what the horns on the beasts are. Another, an eighth horn sprung up among them, different from the others, and uprooted 3 of the original 10 horns. This left only 7 plus the little horn, which became a world ruler. He will be the Antichrist. The little horn spoke boastful, arrogant things, and the little horn waged war against the holy ones until the Ancient of Days arrived and judged the little horn. The little horn's intention was to change times that were established by law in order to promote his anti-Christian agenda. And that's from the Ryrie Study Bible notes. Number 10, the holy ones, most likely Israel, as the set apart people, which is what holy means. Holy means set apart, will be delivered into his hands for how long? 3.5 years. And then God will destroy the beast and set up his kingdom that will last forever. Now I say now back to Revelation, but we got to quit.
Can I ask you one question now? So I always thought right at the very beginning of the tribulation that the Antichrist will just take over.
Yes.
But he's not revealed that he's the Antichrist until the midnight.
No, well, actually, he begins his domination at the beginning of the tribulation, but he is establishing a friendly covenant with the nation of Israel at the beginning. And he makes that covenant. That's Daniel 9:27, remember? All right, but his true colors come out 3.5 years later at the mid-tribulation point, and he's still the same person. But now you see him coming out of the sea. Now you see him in his true colors.
Don't you imagine that in the rapture, that there will be besides just the general mayhem that will happen, but in Israel in particular, Jews in particular, there will be a deep troubling, because I think they're going to start to think, wait a minute, maybe we didn't have it right, making them a prime target for this new Messiah.
Yeah. Oh man, I always hate to quit because I don't know, I just love studying the book of Revelation. I hope you do too.
I was just thinking, when it refers to changing the times and the laws, do you think it has to do with things like changing the calendar, because we've been using a calendar almost worldwide that refers to before Christ and after Christ?
Yes, and I think it may also refer to the Sabbath. It may refer to changing the number of days that are in a week.
That would mess up a lot of other things.
Yeah.
But I was thinking also that probably the 2 most celebrated holidays among peoples on the earth are Christmas and Easter.
Yeah. So he'll set out to try. It doesn't say he's successful, but he tries to change the calendar in order to promote his agenda. And so he's going to try to do away with Christmas and Easter. And did you have a comment?
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm sure that those that are left behind will appreciate if he gets rid of daylight savings time.
Oh, yeah, he'll change daylight saving time, no doubt. All right. Well, we're going to have to quit.
Pastor Shane, would you close us in prayer?
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you again for this evening. We're grateful to be able to just crack open your word and really feast on the nuggets that you've given Pastor Jerry to share with us, Lord. It's a very in-depth study of your word. And Lord, we're grateful for so many that have been faithful before in their transcribing of Scripture and things that have brought it down to our hands. And Lord, we're grateful for it. So Lord, I just would ask that you watch over us as we go from here, and Lord, help us to be studious and mindful this week as we go through each day that's ahead of us. And should you give it to us? And again, Lord, we thank you so much for your love for us, and we're very grateful for it.
Why is it that Satan was still in heaven after he had,
It still had access and does today still have access.
why?
Because